when we think about someone who is high performing, this is usually how we coach them. There are 3 stages and 3 steps to how to perform and increase performance. One, and this is the hardest part, even for someone who's in an A mindset or state, is alertness. Versus the opposite of alertness is what I would just title information indigestion. You know, when you meet with someone and just information just is hard to get back and forth, that's both sides or one person just having indigestion. Versus you want it flowing rapidly. Oftentimes you feel what you would call eggshells. We created a term called NQRs, not quite right. And then when you go to situations, you just feel NQRs, and you just leave kind of like the stuff you should have said and they should have said and you didn't. So alertness is very hard to get. Once you do, you look for real momentum versus you can't force it. Oftentimes you try to force momentum, right? It must be, it's the plan I made. And then aggressive action versus the notion of waiting for it to come to you. And this thing goes in sequence because aggressive action without alertness, kind of dangerous. Where there's momentum, applying aggressive action can have profoundly positive impact, but putting aggressive action where there isn't momentum isn't necessarily going to work. So let me walk you through, I think of this as different strategies. And one of the strategies that we always think about is playing defense first before playing offense. And when I think about one of the terms you'll hear is TP. So everyone in Next Jump is partnered with a TP, but a TP can have 2 meanings. When someone is in a C state, we think of a TP as a talking partner. It's someone that's just helping you process and bring to light, talking partner, bring to light the struggle and the challenge. But when you are actually in an A state, driving in an A job, think of this as your gym buddy. One of the most important things is having a gym buddy. And when you have a good gym buddy, you just work out harder. You go to more difficult things. And what the TP ends up doing is 2 things. It doubles your alertness and it doubles your speed. So you're able to get doubly alert, doubly fast. And truly, information is the driver of making the right decisions, the right calls. So there are 3 things kind of occurring when we think of defense. Defense being, even when you are an A player in an A state with an A job, usually at least a couple times a week, if not multiple times a day, you will go through challenges, which we call swamps, right? So swamp is very dark and murky. And literally what you are learning to do is to recognize the fastest way through swamps is going deeper into it to hit rock bottom and get out the other side. In essence, the muscle you're building is how to go in and out faster. It's not avoiding, it's not denying, because the thing that happens with the human brain, and it's just, I think, barely still understood, is that the things that we're not processing, that we feel desperate about, depleted about, we're just saying to someone before that, yes, when you have a C state player, when you're coaching a C player, you also go into a C state as a coach, right? The whole, can I get a little bit of your time? You're like, oh God, right? Depleted. Like, I mean, you feel stuck with them and you're trying to help them, but it's like, it's just bad things happening. So the process of going through in and out faster is the key. We've gone to a place where we can process really bad things in minutes. We can process it walking between meetings, but that takes practice. It's muscle. It's a skill. And so when we think about what's happening in this swamp, I don't know if you've heard this thing called ladders of inference. I can't remember who actually created it, but it's really good. But think of it this way. There's a pile of data, right? So life in front of us, and nobody has all the data, right? If anyone who ever tells you, they're lying, right? So ladders of inference looks like this. 2 different people. There's steps 1, 2, 3. Step 1 is the data they select. Step 2 is how they process it. Step 3 is their conclusion. Said another way, these are my assumptions. Process is my logic. And what we tend to do is we tend to only share our conclusions. And why people argue endlessly is because They're just butting heads on two different conclusions. And yet, what you have to train yourself, right, your question?
Yeah, I was going to add beliefs. You have beliefs also in that level.
So like when I think I'm putting beliefs under kind of your process, because I'll explain to you how this gets developed, which is they come from your past, right? And so experience is usually bad things that usually happen, but the conversation is a hell of a lot more productive if both people share this. You share the conclusion, but you want to share this. You'll see this in the next exercise. We have 10x. We will model sort of a rating on the feedback, and then we'll explain why, right? And I think the conversations get a lot more productive when you're going through all of these, being able to explain, this is the data point I saw, and this is the NQR, and this is the eggshell, and because of my experience and my belief in this is why I think we should get rid of that person. Like, this bottom part is what's not shared usually. So if I take this one step further, going into the exact, sorry, this is not planned, so I'm running out of whiteboard space. I really would like a wall that's the size of this whole room, but so what's fascinating about, I think I said perception, mindset, behaviors. The word that a lot of times is used a lot is motivation, drive, lack of drive. Some people call it happiness. So this was an interesting thing we saw. It was Jim Lear who initially pointed us to this work, which is 10% of our motivation, our drive, our happiness comes from what's happening in our lives in the present. He said 50% comes from our past, and 40% comes from our future outlook. I know I didn't say future because no one knows the future, but it's our outlook of the future. So when he initially shared this study with us, he said that, you know, the past you can't change. So you're really only looking forward and saying that you can basically fivefold your motivation by altering the narratives you have of a future outlook. Well, we found other research from this group at this Tuftsum University ed tech group that was fascinating. They were telling us that the past actually isn't correct, that we alter our past every time we think about it. And in fact, what they found in the research is this: when we think about our past, as in reflect, the emotion we feel right then when we reflect gets attached to our memory of the past. So we are altering our past based on how we think about it. If you're one that tends...
So if you're a ruminator like me, this is bad, because every time you think about it, you're attaching a new emotion to it. So that history is now being rewritten every time.
Worse and worse.
Thinking about it, making it worse and worse. So talk about bad, they call them bad mental models, right? You have or broken mental models. The more you ruminate, the more broken mental models you'll have, which means then you need to spend time unraveling those models, right? Or those beliefs or those assumptions, which is all Charlie's talking about here in the ladders of inference. If you're not talking about that stuff, you're operating with all those broken mental models.
And they're getting worse and worse. Every time you think about it, right? I know you've had at least two people who have seen something and that you remember it differently. You're both there, but you're like, that's not what happened. One remembers it, it's positive, one remembers it negative. And it's amazing, like the one remembering a positive is attaching the positive emotion as in altering the past memory continuously in a certain way, maybe to a fault, right? God, I always succeed. No, I never fail. Like, I mean, you could get overly confident to the point of arrogance. There's the flip side. You can ruminate. And so we were saying that there are two common ways. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Meghan was saying.
So I think this is what happens. So I'm more insecure than Charlie. He's more, I would call myself insecure, arrogant, just the language that we use. So take that or leave it. But that's how we think about the differences. I will tend to beat myself up over the past in the sense of I feel we've made a mistake or I made a decision that I will ruminate on it and I will beat myself up. That's most of my past narratives will be around that. The future, should I share this too?
Sure.
On the future side and the future outlook, generally speaking, it will be painting a hopeless future. This is really dramatic and extreme. I'm not that broken, but when I am broken, which happens, those are the two sides I can think about when I'm really it's like I'm beating myself up or I'm painting a hopeless future. Charlie will be more on the arrogant side, would more deny or ignore the past issues and challenges. But in the future, it's sort of more of a reckless and desperate acts will come out. And this phrase of I'm responsible, I must act. I'm the only one. I am the, I do this at home, by the way, Morgan at home. The whole in terms of being a mom, I'm responsible. I must act if I don't do it. So that's usually why bad things would happen in the future, right? I paint hopeless, he will paint. I have to act, right? I'm responsible.
And this notion of the beliefs, our mental models come from the past. And the assumption we're making is our mental models are correct. And the reality is many of our mental models are wrong, and they need to be constantly iterated and worked on, especially when information is changing in front of us every day, right? So a mental model of how I was as a teenager cannot apply now. And it applies to our motivation. These two are intricately linked because we tend to do something tied to our mental models. And so this ladders of inference in any given situation, being able to put out and bring to light, and the speed of bringing this to light. So if you are able to bring to light what is happening here and here in any given situation fast, and especially with the TP, and if the TP happens to ideally be opposites, it's amazing how much faster you can navigate and actually succeed in what you do. And so this idea of how do you shift from this 2%, it's not to say, you know what, I'm never a victim. No, we all tend to be victims at some point. We all will go through periods, and many periods, oftentimes, even in the course of one day, you feel this way multiple times. If you can take that swamp, go in, and what I mean by going in is share the ladders of influence, and especially on these things. So put another way, I'll put it in more simple language. Oftentimes the past, the way we look at this looking backwards is we think about prompts of my worst case scenario versus where I should be by now, right? If you're able to put out my worst case scenario, this is our fears, right? Which is coming from our stuff in the past. My worst case scenario, it's colored by stuff that's happened to us versus this notion of where I should be by now. We can't reset when something's not going right. We can't reset and actually go into, okay, where I should be by now was before all this new information entered the equation. But I'm still held on to, I need to be here by now, right? And I have these terrible scenarios. And when you put these down on paper, on a situation, on a job where two people are looking at it, it's amazing what you're able to do. And, I mentioned over here, being empowered is despite the constraints, my options and choices. The first step was despite the constraints. To distinguish between danger and fear is very difficult for us to do. Danger is real. Fear is perceived danger. We make most of it up in our heads. And if you're able to separate that faster in real time, you can process swampy things much faster. And this is a muscle. The more you do it, the better you get trained. And as you navigate that, you become more alert. And once you become more alert, you can look to the next step. So all this is what we often spend time helping people who are in an A state. And I mentioned this because you can apply this to a C state. It's just, they can't process as much oftentimes. So we've shared this and it actually hasn't really resulted in a tremendous amount of stuff. So we found for them, we need to kind of stop them sliding backwards first.